Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I've got a really interesting young lady to introduce you to tonight. She's got an incredible academic background, practical background, and she's also hosting her own podcast right now. And so that'll be interesting to chat about. Dr. Andrea Wojnicki. Did I get it right? No, I didn't get it right.
You got it right. You got it. Wojnicki.
Wojnicki. She is an executive communications coach, a speaker, and as I said, she hosts the Talk About Talk podcast. She's got an MBA, she's got a DBA, a doctorate in business administration. She's got a marketing background, a sales background, a professorship background, but she's now an entrepreneur teaching us all how to communicate better. That sounds kind of fascinating. Dr. Wojnicki, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. And please just call me Andrea.
Andrea. Okay, thanks. So tell me, how did you get into this business of advising, coaching people on communication?
So I was working mostly as a consultant and a little bit as a board member at the time. I had finished my time at the University of Toronto, where I was previously teaching in the MBA program. I was doing consulting, and I thought, I really want to continue learning. And I saw this ad for a podcasting fellowship with Seth Godin, who for those in the marketing world may know, he's considered a marketing guru. And I have a doctorate in marketing, but I thought, I know I can learn something here and I want to learn how to podcast. So I wrote the application. And when I was writing the application for this podcasting fellowship, it asked what the topic would be. And I said, I don't really know, but it's going to be something about communication. So the podcast is going to be Talk About Talk. And then I thought, ooh, that's good. And so I looked it up. The URL was available. The trademark was available. I called my lawyer. I secured the trademark. I secured the URL. And then I started creating content, and I started creating frameworks. And then people started to come to me from the podcast, asking me to do the workshops came first, and then the coaching. And now, the podcasting is really I went from weekly, now it's bi-weekly, and it's really marketing for my business, which is running boot camps, workshops, and one-on-one coaching for executives on all different communication skills. And I love it.
Sounds good. And you like the entrepreneurship more than being a professor.
Yeah. So as we were saying just before the interview, I really surprised myself, a big learning about myself. I'm in my 50s now, and 5 years ago, I never would have guessed that I would love running my own business as much as I do. And I have undergraduate, MBA, and doctorate all in business. I took some entrepreneurial classes. I know the basics about how to run a business and how to run your own business even. But I always thought I'm happy reporting to somebody else. And then I started doing it for myself, and I realized all the cliches you hear are true. You will work harder and longer than you ever have. And it is tough. You don't have all the resources. You have to get into the nitty gritty work, but it's also incredibly satisfying. And I have so much freedom in terms of deciding what to focus on and what not to focus on. So I love it.
And Talk About Talk is primarily about communication.
It's all about communication skills. When it first started out, it was more general communication skills. So everything from talking to your doctor, talking to a grieving friend, how we communicate implicitly by gift giving, like everything you can think of. And it's over time. I think on Monday, I'm releasing episode 142, and it's focused on gender differences in communication. But all of them now, for the last probably 70 or so, have been really focused on communication for executives and for ambitious executives. So executives that want to communicate with confidence, with clarity, and they want to make an impact. And basically they want to get promoted. And they believe, I know a lot of people tell me, I know the technical skills. My boss has told me I got the technical skills down. I need to be a more effective communicator, right? And they believe, and I believe it's true, that if you are a more effective communicator, then you do get noticed for the right reasons, and then your career takes off.
It's interesting that communication is so critically important. It's not something that we necessarily teach that well.
It's so true. Yeah. So many times I hear this, like, why are they not teaching this in high school? I think that the schools are both at the high school level and even college and university level. They are starting to teach more and more communication in terms of presentation skills, right? It's not just sitting and filling out a multiple choice exam and writing an essay. The students are encouraged now to collaborate and to communicate what they've learned. But they're not typically they're not explicitly teaching communication skills. Yeah.
Probably the best education I got in communication was at Harvard Business School, which I got an MBA at. And what they suggested, didn't recommend, but suggested, is that you get a communication or participation buddy, someone that was in the class on the other side of the class and could watch what you said, watch your interaction, and not necessarily comment on your content, but comment on your delivery, your presentation, and whether you were engaging, whether you got moved the class forward, etc. And that was really helpful. It was incredibly helpful to have someone that almost on a daily basis would say something about, what you said, right or wrong, and how you said it.
Yeah. So that reminds me of one of the tactics that I sometimes share with my clients, which is if you have a trusted peer at work, or maybe even someone who's a level up from you who can give you feedback, that's fantastic. And it also makes you more self-aware when you know that someone's watching you, right? So you become, I talk a lot about self-awareness. There's internal and external self-awareness. So internally, what are you thinking and how are you feeling, right? And then external self-awareness is being aware of how others are perceiving you. And if you know that someone is watching you and going to be providing you with feedback, you're probably going to up your game a little bit, right? And the other thing, if you want to take it to the real next level, is watching yourself on video. And I know how hard this is. I literally have a few videos of me speaking that happened, in the last month or so, and I haven't watched them yet. I know how hard it is, but I can also tell you, people ask me this all the time. So if I really want to accelerate my progress, I'm like, you got to watch yourself.
You got to watch yourself. One of the things that I've found, and I think we're probably going to talk about it a little bit today when we talk about confidence. I've recommended to lots of people, stand up. If you've got an opportunity, like if it's a 30-second, comment, you probably can't. But if you're asked to present something, stand up, get to the front of the room. Because when you stand up and you're at the front of the room, you take on a different aura. You are more confident, and I think you up your game in that process. Anyway, we're going to cover a bunch of topics today. Personal branding is our first topic. Then we're going to talk about confidence, and then we're going to have just a general conversation about issues that come up with executives that ask Andrea for help in communication. We're going to take a break for 2 minutes. Come back with Andrea, Dr. Andrea Wojnicki, and talk about communication. Stay with us, everybody. This is going to be an interesting day. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. The topic tonight is communication, and my guest is Dr. Andrea Wojnicki. She is a renowned executive communication coach, speaker, and podcaster. She got her doctorate of business administration from Harvard Business School, where her research focused on consumer psychology and interpersonal communication. Over the course of her career, Andrea worked in brand management. She taught in the MBA program at the University of Toronto, and she serves on several boards. She started her podcast, Talk About Talk, to help ambitious executives catapult, what a great word, catapult their careers by improving their communication skills. She delivers keynote speeches, workshops, and she coaches executives around the world on topics such as personal branding, overcoming imposter syndrome, strategic networking, formal presentation skills, communicating with precision, and demonstrating leadership. She's also the host of the popular biweekly Talk About Talk podcast with over 140 episodes and counting. Dr. Wojnicki, thank you so much again for joining us. We're going to talk, I think, off the top on personal branding. You suggested that this is something that people really needed to consider, focus on, particularly if they want to move ahead in their careers, and that you said that executives particularly need to focus on it. What is personal branding? I think, we've all thought about, brands for products, but personal branding, really? Seriously?
Yeah. So back in 1997, when I was a brand manager working at Kraft Foods, I got the latest edition of Fast Company magazine. And this was back in the days of the hard copy magazine, you may recall. And on the front cover, it said the brand called You, and it was made to look like a box of Tide. And the article was really the seminal article about personal branding, written by Tom Peters. So he didn't invent the term or the idea, but he really brought it to pop culture and to management culture. And the idea is exactly what you just said. It's taking the strategies and the insights and the frameworks that product brand managers use to manage and elevate their brands with people, right? So if you're thinking about things like reputation and identity, that's exactly what it is. So Jeff Bezos has a fantastic definition of personal branding that I use a lot with my clients that seems to really resonate. And it's this: your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. Your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And so I always say quickly, okay, it's not that when you are in the room, you don't have a brand, but this is a mental exercise, right? So think about your boss and maybe your boss's boss talking about who to promote, and there's 3 or 4 candidates and your name comes up. What are they saying and thinking about you? That is your brand at work, right? And so we all have a personal brand, whether we choose to strategically manage
So
it or not.
it's a reputation. Is that what you're saying? It's a reputation.
It is. It's like it is your reputation. And so the analogy that I use is it's like a credit rating. So many people say, oh, I don't want to manage my brand. That sounds so sleazy. I'm like, well, do you manage your credit rating? Because you have a credit rating, whether you choose to manage it or not. That's kind of why we pay our bills on time, right? Et cetera. And you can choose to ignore it, but you still have one. And the same thing goes for your personal brand. You have a personal brand, whether you choose to strategically manage it or not. And I'm not talking about reinventing yourself or being inauthentic in any way. I work with my clients to go deep on identifying the unique and positive themes about them that they're really proud of, that they, their expertise, they could be expertise, it could be personality traits, it could be their values that they really want to reinforce with others, and then coming up with ways of words and phrases to communicate them consistently so that the next time their boss and their boss's boss are in a room, they'll say, I remember this person was talking about this topic and they were communicating with confidence, and they, and then they look them up on LinkedIn. Do you see this? Do you see the way they're describing what they did? Right. So it's all consistently just the same way a product brand manager would do, like the packaging and the product and the price point and all those things are consistently integrated and communicated. This is how we can also manage our personal brand. The definition that I use for developing or building your personal brand is personal branding is about being yourself on purpose. So it's being yourself. Again, it's authentic. You're not manipulating anyone. You're reinforcing the truth. Okay. And it's on purpose. So you're being strategic and you're being disciplined and you're being thoughtful. You're being self-aware. We talked about self-aware a couple of minutes
So
ago.
when you think about a product brand, you come up with it, you dream it up, and then you come up with a tagline, you come up with a logo, and you come up with a vision statement or a big, hairy, audacious goal or something like that. So how do you develop a brand for yourself if all it is yourself and you're authentic? And as you say, it's got to be authentically yourself. How do you come up with that brand?
Brian, I have to tell you, that is such a good question. And by the way, as a podcast host, I hear people say this to me all the time. Great question, Andrea. Great question. I'm like, yeah, okay. Every question is not a great question. That really was a great question. So, and nobody's asked me that before. That's why I think it's a great question. You're right. If you were inventing a brand, right, you start with a blank slate. If you're a product brand, I mean, right? You start with a blank slate. You can't do that with a human. So the analogy is really, imagine you're a brand manager who comes in and you're managing a product that already existed, if you want to use that analogy. Going back to us as in terms of our professional identity, the idea here is I know that I am not good at everything. But I do know what my strengths and my expertise and my passions and my credentials are. And it's about deciding which ones of those I really want to reinforce with others. And at the same time, I'm also providing myself with focus, right? So this is one of the added benefits of spending the time really thinking about this stuff is suddenly I've had clients come to me, for example, who are consultants and they have vast experience in many industries and many functions. And they're like, I don't know how to introduce myself. even to a new client, I don't know how to introduce myself because I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. Like, what do I say? And so we end up going a level up. Like, what is your purpose? I was coaching a very highly regarded consultant recently, and we decided that her superpower is creating impact. She wants to create impact internally with the staff that report to her, and she wants to create impact externally with her clients. And that's why what she does as a consultant is exactly what she should be doing, right? And so when she introduces herself, she says, my superpower is creating bold and inspiring impact with my clients and with the people that work for me. And then she has example after example after example after example. So it's about taking the time in a disciplined and strategic way to think about the unique thing that really resonates with you, that's going to help make sense of what you do, what your value is to other people as well.
Really? That sounds fascinating. Do you write it down?
We do write it down. We actually create an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, believe it or not, that has, I would say, just over a dozen or so themes, everything from, your university degree to the function or discipline that you work in, to personality traits, to what your values are, to awards that you may have won. And then we also, it is personal branding. It's not just your professional identity, it's personal branding. So we also include hobbies and maybe like your family role and those kinds of things. And by the way, those things should be showing up to some extent at work. That's a whole other conversation, whether we want to bring our whole selves to work.
Sounds like a bio.
So the way that it is laid out makes it very, very easy to write your bio. Yes, it does. Yeah. And that reminds me of another kind of principle here, which is your personal brand is constantly evolving. So for example, you're maturing, your family role is changing, or you get promoted, or you learn a new skill, right? So these themes over time can and should also evolve.
So I know you've got your doctorate in business. As we talked about earlier, I'm struggling to get my DBA, my doctorate in business, and I did take a couple of courses, and one of them was the theory of intentional change. And in that course, one had to write down a one sentence brand vision for yourself personally, and then the professor actually suggested shortening it to, like, a mnemonic, a symbol or a word, or that had a bunch of letters or something like that, so you'd always remember exactly what that was, and that he wanted you to put it on a piece of paper and put it on the wall and read it on a daily basis. Do you do anything like that?
So we do develop words around what I call your superpower, and I know that term to some people can sound a little bit flaky. I just haven't come up with a better term. But the superpower, for some people, it's simply a summary of their expertise. But for other people, it is their reason for getting up in the morning. Like for this consultant that I was just talking about, her reason to get up in the morning is to create positive impact and significant impact with positive impact with everything that she does. Right. So, and what you're describing, it sounds like a fantastic exercise, by the way, but what you're describing sounds a little bit like creating a mantra for yourself. So something that kind of grounds you. And I'm a huge fan of reciting mantras, either verbally, like out loud, or even just in your own mind, as a way of elevating your confidence, which when you have this 8.5 by 11 sheet of, or it doesn't even have to even be on the sheet of paper, but when you've done the work to really think about what are the themes in your life across all of these different sort of categories, personality traits, values, accomplishments, et cetera, when you've taken the time to actually write them down or articulate them, your confidence is elevated significantly. So
what's your personal brand?
My superpower is the intersection of coaching and communication. So I realize it took me, so many decades to slowly narrow in on communication, interpersonal communication, and coaching. So my best day is when I'm doing workshops and coaching and someone says, wow, that really changes everything. Andrea, that framework that you taught me or taught us about how to introduce ourselves, I used it and it works, right? And I can see their confidence growing. And I've realized there's this hierarchy of what happens. When you have confidence, you become more clear because you're thinking, instead of thinking about, oh gosh, how nervous I am, you're suddenly thinking about the content of what you're delivering. So it becomes more clear. And then when that happens, you create impact, right? And then that's when you get noticed and you get promoted.
Lots of people don't like to talk about their superpower or their strength because, as you said in something you wrote to me, people sound like they're an arrogant twit when they talk about their strengths. So how do you talk about your strengths or your superpower without sounding like an arrogant twit?
Okay, I do get this question all the time. And there are some very easy tactics that you can use. So I read this quote about a year and a half ago that I thought was brilliant. You know, when we're younger, as kids, and then even early in our careers, other people will tout our accomplishments for us, right? But then at a certain point, we have to speak for our work because our work doesn't speak for itself, right? And I thought, oh, that is a beautiful quote. It's true. You can do great work, and unless you're talking about the impact of your work, sometimes you're not going to get the credit for it, and you're not going to get the credit that you deserve, right? So what can you do about it? How can you talk about your strengths or your accomplishments without sounding arrogant, without sounding like you're bragging? A couple of things. So one is inherent in this definition that I shared of personal branding is that you're not saying that you know everything. You are identifying the things that you know really well. So a lot of the folks that I coach will say, okay, this is my expertise. This is what I am very confident about. This is what I love learning about. So they'll suddenly have the nerve in meetings to speak up. They put their hand up and they'll say, based on my expertise in this area, let me tell you what I think about this topic. And then they're not saying they know everything, but they are reinforcing to everybody in the room that they have expertise in that, right? So it's just keeping in mind, I'm not saying that I'm good at everything, but this is the area that I am confident about. That's one thing. The second thing that I share is more tactical. It's 3 magic words. People tell me. So people tell me that I am an energetic coach, right? So it would sound weird if people said, well, Andrea, why would we hire you to come in and give workshops? Well, I'm really energetic. No. That just sounds weird. But if I say, people tell me that I am incredibly enthusiastic and I create this energy and interactive culture in the workshops or environment in the workshops, right? So people tell me, and the bonus of that is it's like social proof, right? It's somebody else is saying it about you. So as long as it is true that people have told you, instead of saying the thing like I'm really
Got to be
smart,
authentic.
yeah, it always has to be true. That with everything that I coach, it has to be true. And then the third tactic that I suggest people use is to say the thing that they want the other person to know and immediately pivot to something else and dwell on that other thing. So for example, you and I both have degrees at Harvard and we both know about the H-bomb. Sometimes when we say Harvard, that's all people hear and they think we're bragging, right? However, I want people that are hiring me to know that I have a Harvard degree. So how do I not sound arrogant when I say it? I say, I earned my doctorate at Harvard Business School, and I immediately pivot. And I did my research, and I focused my research on interpersonal communication and consumer psychology. So basically, I was looking at word of mouth, why people talk, how people talk, why do they not talk? It's fascinating. And then people go, oh yeah, wait, did she say Harvard? Yes, she did, but that's not where she's focusing, right? So
That's interesting. Because it's something that I've run into in my career. And you know what I usually do is I say I went to school in Boston or I went to school in the United States, and
So,
people will then ask or be interested and look it up or follow up. But I rarely, if ever, tell people in meeting them or in business communication, business meetings, etc., that I went to Harvard, because it does often sound, I think, arrogant.
yeah, it's got, talk about a powerful brand, right? And I know some people are like, wow, and some people are like, oh yeah, you think you're so great. So
Yeah,
that's why we call it the H-bomb.
You had commented on an award that I received. I never ever tell people about that. It's always something that if they find out about, fine, but I never tell them about it. So it's kind of interesting that
Yeah.
I very resistant to do that because I think it comes off as arrogant.
Yeah, I remember when I had just recently graduated and I noticed how people, when I was talking to them, about whatever business related topic we were talking about, or I was in academia, right? And then they would find out after the conversation that I went to Harvard or that I had my doctorate, and they'd be like, oh, and I think that you're right. There's something about people finding that kind of information out about you later. But for my purposes, if I'm talking to an HR manager who's like, well, because there are a lot of coaches out there.
Yeah.
There are a lot of executive coaches, even a lot of communication coaches, right? So the difference between how and what I coach versus others is mine is grounded in academic research, and I want them to know that. So, but I don't dwell on it.
Well, and I think that one of the things that you talked about in regards to a brand is what's your superpower, strength. I think another way to sort of describe it is what makes you unique. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a strength, but it's what makes you unique. And what makes you unique is probably your academic background, your Harvard background, and the fact that you're this enthusiastic coach and presenter. And that may be your strength, but it's also what makes you unique. And every brand, every person, I think, has got to be unique. If we're all exactly the same, the world's a pretty boring place.
Absolutely. Everybody has a thing. And for some people, they know what it is, and lots of people don't know what it is.
Yeah.
So that's really fun. I was just helping a young gentleman who's 17 years old yesterday think about what his was. He's applying to university, and he's thinking about how to position himself. And I was like, you don't need to know what you're going to be when you grow up when you're 17, but you got to know what makes you unique compared to your peers. And it was really fun. Yeah.
One of the best ways that was recommended to me to think that through and to think through not only how you're unique, but what you want to focus on in your uniqueness and your strength going forward is to write your own eulogy, to think about, what someone would say if you passed away and someone had to say the eulogy, and frankly, what you'd like them to say, so that if what you'd like them to say is not consistent with what you think they would say, then you know that you got to make some changes in life.
That's right.
To improve upon yourself, so that you focus on those things that you really, think are your uniqueness and your strengths, and that you want to be remembered for.
Yeah. So when I'm working with clients, whether it's in a workshop or one-on-one coaching, I have several exercises that I go through to help populate this personal branding document. The first one is take out a blank sheet of paper and think about your past, your present, and your future. And the future, one of those questions is, how do you want to be remembered? What do you want your legacy to be? So that's exactly your point. And then the other question on there is, how are you unique compared to your classmates, compared to your work colleagues, compared to your family, right? So you've nailed it. Brian, you obviously did really well in your marketing class when you were at Harvard.
I flunked my first marketing exam.
That's so funny. That is funny.
Another thing, and I wonder whether you've done this or not, or whether you recommend it. Actually, my daughter came home from high school once, very excited about a project she had to do. She was asked to do a vision board, and what they had to do is to go and cut out pictures of things they wanted to accomplish and be in life, and described who they were. Do you like that?
Yeah. So I love that. A lot of executives are like, I need the next thing. So they want to, so I give them always this blank sheet of paper exercise that I shared with you. And then I also ask them to email at least 5 people and ask them, I give them a script of what to ask their it's family, friends, work and personal relationships, I guess, to email 5 people to ask them for input. And then we start going through personality tests. We do things like, you could do a vision board. We also look at archetypes. So I feel like almost every day I'm like, oh, that's a great exercise. That's a great exercise. So, it kind of depends on how much time they have. The vision board is such an amazing idea. I was at my son, I have a 20-year-old who's just starting 3rd year college, and I was at his university last year, and there was a professor there talking about that. They have a course in their curriculum, and this is a STEM school, in their curriculum, where they're asking the students, part of what they're graded on is creating one of these vision boards. And they're really encouraging them to be more self-aware and more purposeful about what they're going after and how they're communicating about themselves. Yeah.
You mentioned archetypes. What are archetypes?
Archetypes are universal patterns for how humans think about things, right? So if you Google archetypes, you'll see there are typically around 12 archetypes that we use to describe characters and brands and people. And so it's actually my favorite exercise. After we've done the blank sheet of paper exercise and we've emailed other people to get external input, then we look at these archetypes usually, and we identify which one or two, no more than two archetypes each person conforms to. So I am the sage and the magician. You can see, if you're watching the video, you can see I have my books here, I have my degrees, right? So it's the sage, learning and teaching. That's one of my archetypes. And then the other one is magician, right? So I love being, in the words of archetypes, like a spiritual guide, taking people through a transformation. So helping them elevate their communication skills and get promoted at work. That's my happy place. So I'm a combination of the sage archetype and the magician archetype.
Fascinating. I'm gonna have to check out these archetypes.
Yeah,
we're going to take a break for some messages and come back, and we're going to talk about the other two issues that you talked about. Confidence is the next topic with Dr. Andrea. I'm going to get this wrong. Wojnicki. No, I apologize. Dr. Andrea. We're going to take a break. And her podcast, by the way, is Talk About Talk. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes.
Okay.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're talking tonight about communication. Our guest is Dr. Andrea Wojnicki. And she is a renowned executive communication coach, speaker, and podcaster. Her podcast is called Talk About Talk. And we've been talking about personal branding so far this evening. Next is, you said, confidence is key. What are some of the top ways, you called them hacks, top ways that people can seek to overcome imposter syndrome and other issues and have more confidence?
So I was thinking as I was preparing for this interview, Brian, that personal branding and confidence, are the top two topics that I get asked to coach on and to do workshops on. And interestingly, personal branding feeds into confidence, right? So I just want to start by saying, if you want to improve your confidence, no matter what stage of your career that you're at, and even no matter what your industry or function is, right? So you can elevate your confidence by focusing on your personal brand. When I coach people on confidence, I usually start by talking about imposter syndrome and busting through some of those myths. So back in 1970,
what is the imposter syndrome?
The imposter syndrome, that's what I was just going to say. Back in 1978, two female social psychologists, two academics, did some research on successful women. And they wanted to understand what made these women more successful than other women, and how did that compare to successful men, right? And they found one of the themes of the research, or outputs of the research, was that they suffered from what they called imposter phenomenon, meaning exactly what it sounds like. They felt like an imposter. If I keep talking, people might realize I shouldn't be here. I don't deserve a seat at the table. Basically, I'm an imposter. And they suffered from a lack of confidence. Since then, that was in 1978. Since then, a lot of research has been done on this, and it's changed from being called imposter phenomenon to now imposter syndrome. So it's like a sickness, but it's not a sickness. Here's the thing. Almost all of us, almost every single one of us, whether we're junior in our career, senior in our career, whether we're female, whether we're male, it doesn't matter. All of us feel this sometimes. You walk into a room that's unfamiliar in particular, so this happens a lot when we're younger in our career, but even later on, right? Like you join a board, or you walk into a presentation and you don't know anyone there, or a networking event, and you're like, imposter syndrome. It really helps to know that everybody experiences this. And in fact, it may be a good thing. So this is one of the other great things that I share is, when you feel that shot of adrenaline, instead of thinking, uh-oh, I'm nervous, I'm about to start sweating, and my hands are going to get clammy, and my face is going to turn red, and all those things that I know happened to me and probably happened to you, Brian. Instead of thinking that and going down into that ruminating spiral, label that shot of adrenaline as the positive energy boost that you need. Think about the people that you've seen on stage that have energy and enthusiasm, and they're positive, right, about the topic that they're, or even just someone that you meet, versus someone who's boring and dull, and clearly they could use a shot of adrenaline, right? Yep. So simply labeling it. I coached a couple people last week, and this insight is huge. So don't think of it as a negative, think of it as a positive, because it's going to fuel you and provide you with positive energy. That's one of the main hacks that I coach people with.
You know, Amy Cuddy, who I think is a strategy consultant, strategy professor, et cetera, had this thing about sort of fake it till you make it. Do you agree with that kind of philosophy in regards to confidence?
Yeah, so she was on the faculty at Harvard at some point when I was there, and she has one of the top TED Talks where she talks about power posing, which is standing up tall. Your point about standing up in front of the room, stand up tall. Confident people take up a lot of space, period, right? So take up a lot of space, put your hands on your hips, inflate your lungs, push your chest out, and it's like the Wonder Woman pose. She got in a bit of trouble because some of her research wasn't replicable, which means other people tried to run the same experiments and they weren't repeated. But I can tell you this. There is definitely more than something to the point that when you take up more space, other people believe that you are legitimately credible because you are appearing confident. And also her point was your brain believes your body. And I know that this is true in other contexts. It's not just from power posing where you suddenly feel confident. Think about smiling or breathing, right? When you smile, even if you fake a smile, you just push the corners of your lips up. Research shows, and you can imagine how they did this research. They hooked people up to machines where they would do a chemical analysis of people's blood. If you smile, endorphins are released in your blood. So I say to my kids when they're down or nasty, I say, hey, put a smile on your dial and fake it, okay? Because then the endorphins will come in and you'll feel better. So this is true in the context of smiling. It's also true in the context of breathing. When you feel, you're in fight or flight, you're nervous, and you, in particular, slow your exhale, your brain says, oh, I'm not gasping for air anymore. Everything must be okay. And then it reduces the stress hormones that are pumping through your body, right? So I do believe that there is something to the power pose. I do it. I slow my breathing down on purpose. I remind myself, I know what I know, and I'm keen to learn more. I'm not saying I'm good at everything, but I do know what I'm an expert at. And then I will do some version of a power pose for sure to try to elevate my confidence.
So I've got a couple of tricks that I do for my confidence. One is I put a jacket on. If I'm in a meeting, if I'm making a presentation and I've got a jacket on, for some reason, I feel like I'm more in control. I feel like I'm, not more powerful, but more influential, more put together. And so even, during COVID, if I had an important presentation, even virtually, I would put on a sports jacket or jacket. And that just for some reason made me feel like I was a different person when I had a jacket on. The second thing I do, and I did this before every exam in university, I do it before I make a speech or go to an important interview or something like this. I play one of two songs. It used to be September by Earth, Wind and Fire, which was my, get up song when I was in university. Lately, it's been Pitbull's song Fireball, which also gets me going whenever I need to get going. But that, rockin' music loud gets me going like nothing else before a big thing. And then the last thing I do is I do that Superman pose. So it's not a power pose. It's actually the Superman pose where you're up on one foot and hands extended like Superman. Awesome. And I'll do that. I've done that a couple of times at the front of a room before a big room before I got up on stage or something like this. And people, what the heck is that guy doing? But it works all the time. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it does. It does. I love your hacks. So I want to say, and I've been doing a lot of thinking about this and recently I've been interviewing people about this as well. the whole dress for success idea, you know, dress for the job you want, not the job you have. What you wear is communicating something about you.
Yep.
You could argue that it's even more important than the words that are coming out of your mouth, because people see you before they hear you, right? So, and you're also influencing yourself. So when you put that jacket on, you're telling everybody else, I'm taking this meeting seriously. You're also telling yourself, I'm taking this meeting seriously, right? So you're communicating something through your what you wear all the time. And there was a lot of talk about this during COVID, wasn't there?
Yeah. I think, Amy Cuddy, didn't she use the word presence though? And one of the reasons why she used the word presence was because she thought confidence sometimes comes off as overconfidence and arrogance. So I guess where's the line that confidence can go too far?
So I said it a couple minutes ago. I said that confident people take up a lot of space. You know, you've probably also heard the term man spreading. So these guys that kind of lean forward and they spread their legs out and they take a lot. And like, even when I say it, I sound like I'm being kind of arrogant, right? So there's always a line. There's a line with everything that I coach though, right? So, I mean, you could become so fixated on your mantra that you forget what you're doing, or you could, so another one of the, for example, confidence hacks that I give to people is track the ratio of how much you're talking versus other people. You want to minimize how much you're talking and encourage other people to talk more, especially, and you're working on your listening skills and you're interacting and engaging. And sometimes people say, oh, so I shouldn't talk at all. I'm like, okay, no, there's like a line that you don't want to cross when it comes to confidence, even when it comes to listening, storytelling is another one. So you don't want to be that guy that every time he shows up to a meeting, everyone's like, oh, what story is he going to tell this time? Right. So all of these things can definitely be taken too far. I guess it's a matter of identifying where we have opportunities, where we can improve. So are you underconfident? I do coach some people who come across as overconfident. They all tell me that they're not,
but they do. No question.
In particular, he'll say, people tell me that I come across as arrogant, but I'm telling you, I don't feel arrogant. And I'm like, okay, so you need to stop saying I and me, and you need to start talking about you. You need to start talking about other people, for example. But
I used to work for Jim Pattison, a very successful entrepreneur, billionaire. And he used to say that old line about God gave us one mouth, but two ears. So you got to listen twice as much as you speak. And,
exactly.
I think that's a good guide that, who was it that said, first seek to understand before you seek to be understood?
Yeah. Stephen Covey. Yeah. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I use that quote too, although I didn't give Jim Pattison. I can't remember who said it first, but that is a brilliant quote. And I would take that to the next level too. So it's about tracking the ratio. And then for really strong people leaders, I say not only tracking how much you're talking versus how much other people are talking in the room, but look at each individual who may report to you and make space for them. So if there's someone who's quiet because they're shy, maybe before the meeting, you could say, I'm going to call on you 3/4 of the way through the meeting if you haven't said anything. So please think about what you're going to say and then make space for them to be comfortable and talk. And really effective managers are not just tracking the ratio of how much they're talking, but everybody in the room.
Well, I got to tell you, the biggest difference between Jim Pattison, who I thought was one of the best bosses I ever had, and a lot of other people that I've interacted with, is in meetings, particularly meetings where we had to come up with a decision or an analysis and then a decision. He would never speak first. Because he knew once he spoke, everyone else would, more than likely just repeat what he had said and agree with him. And so what he would do is he would go around the room and ask other people what they thought before he would then speak. And I find way too many bosses, leaders, managers, they want to show that they're the smartest person in the room and they'll speak first, which robs everyone else of that opportunity to have an input.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're reminding me of this phenomenon called psychological safety, which is Dr. Amy Edmondson, also from Harvard. She talks a lot about psychological safety, and she's done research for many decades on it. It is the number one factor that contributes to team performance. And it's basically creating an environment where unique perspectives, unique experiences, unique backgrounds are all valued, and people feel safe about saying what they really think. And so the research, not surprisingly, shows that these teams are the ones where people go, hang on, we didn't think about this one thing, right? So they end up performing better than any other team. And so it sounds like Mr. Pattison was an early adopter of this. So I hope that he was actually listening to what everybody was saying. It sounds like he probably was.
Oh, he was. Very clearly he was.
Based on all you smart people here, here's what I think. And it was probably building on what other, so amazing. Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things. Lately, he's been, I don't know, did he write a book recently or something? Because I feel like
I don't think so. He's getting up there. And so a lot of people are, wanting to interview him. I did an interview with him, I don't know, 6 months ago. That was just excellent. I really enjoyed working for him. And he's one of those individuals that I have more respect for than almost any other business person I've met. Anyway, we're going to have to take a final break for some messages, and we're going to be back with some concluding comments with Dr. Andrea, because I can't pronounce her last name. I'm going to try again before the next break, about communication. And we're going to talk about some of the other issues that executives ask her about. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Dr. Andrea Wojnicki. She is a renowned executive communications coach, a speaker, a podcaster. She's got a DBA, a doctorate in business administration from Harvard Business School. She's got an MBA from York. She's had research focused on, this is interesting, consumer psychology and interpersonal communication. And over the course of her career, she's worked in brand management. She's taught in the MBA program at U of T, and she served on several boards. She's now started a podcast called Talk About Talk, which helps executives catapult their careers by improving their communication skills. And she coaches people on topics such as personal branding, which we've talked about, overcoming the imposter syndrome, which we've talked about, strategic networking, which I'd really like to talk about, formal presentation skills, communicating with precision, and demonstrating leadership. This Talk About Talk podcast has over 140 episodes, and it's available free. You just go to talkabouttalk.com. Dr. Andrea Wojnicki. Did I get it right? Fantastic.
You nailed it.
We said that there were a couple of other topics that you wanted to cover that executives ask you about. What are some of the other issues? We've talked about confidence, and we've talked about personal branding. What are some of the other big issues that people want some help with?
So there are a few, right? So I get a lot of questions about how to effectively introduce yourself. I get questions about personal branding, as I said. I get questions about communicating with precision, and I get questions about demonstrating leadership. So I'm not sure where we should start. Why don't we start with
talk about precision?
Precision, yeah. So I find that communicating with precision is something that some more senior executives are asking me about. So they've demonstrated that they have the technical expertise to get promoted to the senior levels, right? And they have the people leadership skills. And what they're really looking at doing is becoming a more clear and concise communicator. And so they'll come to me, and sometimes we'll work together for 3 or 6 months and focus on communicating with precision. And I have a couple of hacks that I'm happy to share with you. One of them, and this is actually my favorite episode of all the Talk About Talk episodes, is episode number 93, and it's the power of 3.
The power of 3.
This is what I recommend. If you're ever wondering how many paragraphs to include in your persuasive essay, how many reasons to tell your boss that you recommend something, or if somebody asks you a question, and this is where the precision comes in. If someone asks you a question like, well, tell me, what do you think about this? And you can say, gosh, I think there are many ways to answer that, but let me tell you 3 things that come to mind. What you're doing is you're providing a framework for yourself and for the other person about what you're going to share with them, right? And so they'll know, like, I don't know about you, but I've been in meetings with people who I'm like, are they ever going to shush? Are they ever going to shush? And you don't know whether they're at the beginning or the end of their whatever they're sharing. If they've told you, I'm going to tell you 3 things, and now the 3rd thing is, then you know exactly where you are. And it's just a way of communicating really with precision, because you're limiting yourself to 3 things, and you're also prioritizing 3 things. So that's my number 1 hack for communicating with precision, is leverage the power of 3 whenever you can. And if you're ever wondering, like, how many things should I say? Just make 3 your default. It's like 2 is okay. 4 is a bit too many. 3 is perfect. 3 is a trend. 3 is balanced, but 3 is not overwhelming. And 3 is also easy to remember, right? So if you say 3 things to someone, they can probably remember them. Once you get to a 4th, it's like, I don't know about you, but I need to start taking notes. So
yeah, I had this guy that that was my nemesis at business school, and he was always. I think he took debate in high school or something like this, and it was always 3 things. It was always 3 things. And you know, when he would put his hand up and he'd say, "I have," and the whole class would go, 3 things to say. So I think it's a good idea, but you can't do it all the time, and it can't be your intro.
Yeah, exactly like what I said before. It's, you know, you can't be power posing all the time. You can't be, you know, asking questions all the time. You can't be telling a story all the time. All of this needs to come in moderation. It's so in particular, the clients that I'm sharing this with are the ones that ramble. They either don't have structure or they just don't know when to shut their mouth. Right. So I was coaching one executive in Toronto, a fantastic gentleman who's, you know, they're coaching him to eventually become the CEO of a very large organization. And they told me, his boss told me, and he told me that he needs to work on his communication. And I kept saying, like, what do you mean communication? There's so many things. And then I realized after our first meeting, I said, when you say communication, you mean rambling. Like you don't stop. And he said, oh, Andrea, I have the reputation of being an epic storyteller. And I was like, oh my goodness. So we need to shorten those stories, and we need to make sure that, you know, when you're talking, it's really with impact. It's not like the background, you know, default is he's talking all the time.
These podcasts sound really interesting. How does one get them? Is this something you have to pay for? Where do you find them, etc.?
The podcasts are free. So however you listen to podcasts, if you already listen to podcasts, you can go to Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, whatever podcast platform you use, and just search Talk About Talk. And I should be on the first page there. If you aren't listening to podcasts already, just go to the talkabouttalk.com website and click on the tab at the top that says podcasts. And then you'll see there, I list the top 3 most downloaded episodes of all time, of the 100 and soon to be 142 episodes. And the 3 most recent episodes. And then also there's an archive at the bottom. So all the information that you need about the podcast is there.
Dr. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. This has been a fascinating conversation.
It was really fun, Brian. Thank you so much.
You come across, you've come highly recommended by several people, and you haven't been a disappointment. You are incredibly knowledgeable, very articulate. And I think that we've all learned something tonight. Thank you so much.
Great. I'm so happy to hear. Thanks, Brian.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thanks for joining. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. But you can also get me via my podcasts and my video casts on my website, briancrombie.com. My podcasts are also on SoundCloud and Audible and Apple, wherever podcasts are posted. And all my videos are up on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So you can catch me there as well. Andrea, I really appreciate it. Maybe one of these days we should do a coaching session live on the show. That might be fun.
Oh, I love that idea. Let's do it, Brian. Definitely.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.